It doesn't look like you're getting support from the Democrats on this. You're going against the judges now. What's next?
Another flight. Another flight every day. The teams are going to be out there every day. Every day, the men and women of ICE are going to be in the neighborhoods of this nation arresting criminal, illegal alien, public safety threats, and national security threats. Lawrence, you're not going to stop us. I'm proud to be a part of this administration. We're not stopping. I don't care what the judges think. I don't care what the left thinks. We're coming.
A defiant message. That's Tom Homan, the border czar in the Trump administration, after deporting migrants to El Salvador without full due process. We'll bring the latest on the legal fight over those flights, which a judge ordered to return to the United States before they reach their destination. So far, the Trump administration ignoring that. We'll also get a live report from Tel Aviv on the new Israeli strikes across Gaza, the deadliest attack since the ceasefire agreement with Hamas was signed a couple of months ago. Good morning. Welcome to Morning Joe. It is Tuesday, March 18th. With us, the co-host of our fourth hour, Jonathan Lemire. He is a contributing writer at The Atlantic, covering the White House and national politics. Also with us, the host of Way Too Early, Ali Vitale, Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist and associate editor of The Washington Post, Eugene Robinson, and U.S. national editor at the Financial Times, Ed Luce. Good morning to you all. Joe, there's a lot of heavy news to get to this morning, but I have some good news for you. The Major League Baseball season is underway. The Cubs and Dodgers in Tokyo. It's happening. It's happening.
America's real game.
There it is.
Right now.
In Tokyo.
Baseball,
there it is.
Apple pie, and the Tokyo Dome.
Look at
starting right now, baby. How exciting. This is so exciting that that baseball season is underway. We're thrilled about it around our household. Hope always springs eternal. Really, though, what a great game to start off with. I would have preferred it been a little closer to home, but still a great game to start off. And we need some good news. You know, Willie, we just saw a member of the Trump administration saying he doesn't care what judges think. Newsflash from James Madison, you don't really have that choice. You know, the thing is, I hear a lot of people being shocked about how could a federal judge do this? Well, Donald Trump won by 1.5%. Well, for bloggers, I'll say this slowly. This is what happens in Madisonian democracy. Federal judges do have the power to question the authority of a presidential action. And then, as some Republican senators, I think John Kennedy from Louisiana said, you know, that's why God created the appellate courts. But just, again, for our blogging friends, do people still blog, Willie? I really don't know. Do people blog? Do they?
I think so, yeah, with the typewriter.
I had sushi last night. So I'm going to talk a little more slowly than usual so they'll understand it. This happens under America's Constitution. It happened to Barack Obama, a guy who won a massive landslide. Biggest landslide win, I think, that we've seen since Richard Nixon or Ronald Reagan. Barack Obama's ADAPA program was actually stopped by a single federal judge in Texas. He appealed it, and it went up to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court ultimately ruled against the Obama administration. You also had Joe Biden's vaccine mandates also being stopped in 2021 by a single federal judge. Guess where? In the state of Texas. You also had Barack Obama's gender policy stopped by a single federal judge in the state of Texas. And they got appealed. And you had George W. Bush's NSA warrantless wiretap program getting stopped by a single federal judge back in 2007. And now what happened after that? What happens under our Constitution? They get appealed. And sometimes the judges follow the lower federal court judges, and sometimes they don't. But every time I hear somebody go, oh, my God, Donald Trump got elected by 1.5 percentage points. How in the world could anybody stop a president that got elected by everybody? Well, when he got elected, he was elected to lead one of three parts of our government. 3 separate and equal co-branches. So this is just what happens. Just like, I mean, Willie, this would be like people blogging. I am shocked that every March they get over 60 basketball teams and throw them together to play. No, this happens every year. And the fact that people in the Trump administration and the fact that supporters are acting shocked that a federal judge could do this just means they either don't know history or they're ignoring history. And no, administration officials don't have the choice to say, I'm not going to listen to what judges say.
Yeah, those officials ignoring history and ignoring the Constitution, all these things that we take for granted, that we understand this is the way our system works, we're having to say out loud again, as you just explained very well, which is that there are appellate courts and it could go all the way to the Supreme Court, and you don't get to just ignore those decisions. So let's explain what we're talking about here. The Justice Department has until noon Eastern today to answer key questions about the deportation of migrants to El Salvador without due process. The judge set that deadline during a tense hearing yesterday after he pressed a DOJ lawyer about Saturday's flights. He wanted to know how many there were and how many were in the air at the time of his ruling, which the lawyer refused to answer, citing national security concerns. The judge appeared puzzled, according to the Washington Post, noting that he reviews classified information all the time. He summarized the administration's position as, quote, "We don't care, we'll do what we want." Meanwhile, we are learning more about the timeline of Saturday's events with those flights. According to the Post, 2 of the 3 flights had already left Texas before the judge's ruling in court at 6:47 Eastern Time. That decision was entered into the docket at 7:26, 10 minutes before the 3rd plane took off. Officials in Honduras confirmed to the New York Times all 3 planes spent several hours at an air base there before taking off for El Salvador. The paper reports the planes landed in El Salvador after midnight. The White House yesterday confirmed 137 of the 261 immigrants sent to El Salvador were expelled from the United States using the Alien Enemies Act, Joe, an old law that Donald Trump and the administration is invoking to get rid of, they say, from our country, gang members. The vetting process of people to determine who is in a gang and who's not, and due process in general, remains up in the air this morning.
Well, I mean, you know, the thing is, again, chances are very good that the higher courts, just looking at past precedent, will probably give them the power to be able to do what they want to do on immigration policies. But they can't just go ahead and do it and ignore federal judges' orders. Let's bring in right now to talk more about the senior legal affairs reporter at Politico, Josh Gerstein. Josh, again, there's so many things that are surprising about this. But to see White House officials and supporters of Donald Trump shocked, oh, my God, a single federal judge can't stop the president of the United States when George W. Bush's NSA wiretapping program was stopped by a single judge. Joe Biden's vaccine mandates were stopped by a single judge. Barack Obama's immigration program for the parents of DACA participants stopped by a single federal court. So again, they have to know, the lawyers inside have to know, this happens to every administration. This is nothing new under the sun.
Yeah, you're quite right about the history, Joe. I mean, it really took off under the last few years of the Obama administration. We started to see more and more of these nationwide injunctions. And look, it has been controversial within the legal community. You've had some scholars speak out and say, is this the right way to do this? Supporting this argument that maybe a single federal judge shouldn't have this power. But at least in recent years, they have had this power, and the proposals for legislative reforms to this have really not gotten off the ground. And so it is not a terribly new phenomenon. It's one that the federal government, under presidents of both parties, have been struggling to deal with for at least the last decade and a half, I would say.
Yeah, and again, John Lemire, this goes all the way back, George W. Bush, 2007, in the middle of his war on terror, had his NSA warrantless wiretapping program stopped by a single federal judge. And again, yeah, no president likes this. Every president says the same thing. Single judge, it's frustrating that a single judge has to stop it, and then you have to go through the appeals process. I will say, though, in a lot of cases, the lower district court judge's decision is ultimately upheld by the Supreme Court. So, again, it's whether they like it or not, no president, whether it was Barack Obama, who had it done to him time and time again, Joe Biden, or George W. Bush, no president has the right to say, or his administration, because the president hasn't said, I'm going to ignore federal judges yet, I don't think. But administration officials can't say, we're just going to ignore the judges.
Yeah, being frustrated by lone federal judges is a bipartisan experience. And certainly President Biden in his term, covering that extensively, repeatedly would be frustrated, particularly on like student loan issues, where a judge would knock things down. So, Josh, let's talk a little more specifically about what happened yesterday in that hearing about these deportation flights. Clearly a very frustrated federal judge. So take us inside the room there and what this means potentially going forward, especially in light of pretty bellicose threats there from members of the Trump administration, including Tom Homan, saying, look, we will defy federal court orders in order to carry out our deportation plans.
Well, the judge handling that is James Boasberg. He's the chief judge of the U.S. District Court in Washington. And, this was a fairly tense hearing. He's a very mild-mannered guy there. It's hard to rile him up, but you could tell during this hearing he was beginning to get riled up. He was irritated by a couple of the things that the government lawyers said, in addition to sort of stonewalling him on the facts of the situation. There were questions raised by the Justice Department there where they said, well, we don't have to follow your orders once these planes leave U.S. territory or leave U.S. waters. The judge found that to be very dubious. Courts regularly order relief for people who are overseas when it comes to U.S. agencies and the actions of the U.S. government. So the notion that they have no authority beyond U.S. territorial waters over the executive branch is just one that is very dubious. And there were other arguments that the judge raised against, that the administration raised against his orders that he just found, I think, underwhelming, and he got a sense that the administration had rushed the departure of some of these planes in order to avoid his jurisdiction and his authority, and you could tell that he was irked by that and trying to consider what his next options were. One thing I would point out, though, Willie and Joe, is that the tone that the lawyers took in the courtroom was somewhat different than you heard from Tom Homan, and we heard even from Attorney General Pam Bondi. They did say that they would not defy the judge's order going forward. They insisted they somehow had not broken it already, but they said they would withhold these sorts of flights under the Alien Enemies Act authority going forward. So there was sort of a concession here by the administration in court that you're not hearing in those statements from Tom Homan and Pam Bondi. Yeah,
which, as you say, is directly at odds with what we just heard Tom Homan say. So there are going to be more flights today. So we'll see how that shakes out. Senior legal affairs reporter at Politico, Josh Gerstein, walking us through all this. Josh, thanks so much.